Hey, this is just going to be a really quick video on how I added rounded ends to curves using geometry nodes. So the first thing you're going to want to do is create a Bezier curve, and now you might be tempted to go into the geometry tab here and increase the depth to add thickness to it, but that is not the way you should be doing it. To get started, first you need to add a geometry nodes modifier, create a new one. Let's just name this curve lol, and then go over to the geometry nodes tab. I don't really use this window, so I'm just going to close it. So what you're going to want to do first is to add a curve to mesh node. And what this is going to do is that it's going to add thickness to the curve based on whatever profile we give it. And for the profile, we're just going to use a curve primitive curve circle and connect that directly into the profile curve. Now it's a bit thick, so we're going to set the radius to 0.1, and that'll be good enough for what we're doing right now. You could change it later, but yeah, just for right now, we are going to add a join geometry node at the end, just to be prepared. So the way we're going to add a rounded end to the curve is that we're going to place a UV sphere directly onto the end of it, copying the scale and rotation and everything. So what we need first is half of a UV sphere. So we're going to create a UV sphere node, and we are going to connect that to a transform and connect the geometry there. And for right now, we're just going to plop this directly into the join geometry node, and we're going to set the scale to 0.1 so that's the same size as the radius of the curve. And so after scaling it down, we're going to hook it up to a mesh boolean, and what this does is it takes one shape and it cuts that shape out of the other. So we're going to take a cube and hook that up to a set position node, and hook that up to the mesh here, and set the Z to -0.5. And so as you can see, that cuts the UV sphere perfectly in half, but there is an n-gon on the bottom that we want to get rid of. And so the way that I found to do this, which I'm sure there's a better way to, is to create a delete geometry node, set it to face, and then create a face area node, add a math node, and then set this to greater than, set the value to there and there, and then set the threshold to 0.01. And what this does is it just takes that face and deletes it because it has the wider area. So there, that is the UV sphere done. I'll just organize everything and move it over. Very broad definition of organizing. So what we need to do next is that we need to connect this UV sphere half to the ends of the curve. And to do that, we need to create an instance on points node. Hook this up. This is the instance. Here, let me just cut that. Oops. Cut that. And set the geometry to the points. Hook that back up into the join geometry. And there, you can see that we have one on each end. The rotation's wrong, but we'll fix that in a second. But there is a small issue with this. If we create any more segments, you can't see it from this angle, but if you look inside, you see that it copies the instance to every single point of the curve. So if you have like a 30-point curve, but you just want the rounded points on the end, that is going to be an issue. So thankfully, Blender has a node to help counteract that, and that is the endpoint selection node. So what this does is it takes the start size and the end size, and you can tell Blender exactly how many points from each end you want to be selected. So for right now, we're only going to do start size 1. We're going to keep the end size at 0, because we only want to work on one point at a time. And so to get this UV sphere to copy the rotation and angle of the curve, we're going to have to do some vector math, which I don't really understand that well at all, but we need to do it for this. So we're just going to set that to subtract, and we are going to subtract the position from the curve handle positions. And we are going to select the left one specifically because that's the one we're editing right now. This is the left curve. And we take that and we'll hook that right up into an Euler to vector, or a line Euler to vector node. Make sure that the vector is connected to the vector and not the rotation, because if this vector is hooked up directly into the rotation and you put this in, it'll automatically hook up into rotation, and that will not give us what we want. So we need to make sure that that's connected to the vector. And set this to Z, and there you go, it's connected. And it follows it wherever it goes. Everyone's happy. Now to make it copy the scale of the handle, that is really easy. We're just going to add a radius node. Set that there and hook that directly up into the scale. And now if you press Alt-S to scale the handle, it just works. It just works perfectly. Now obviously this end still doesn't have anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these nodes that we just did to hook up the UV sphere to the end of it. And we're going to press Ctrl G to make that a group. And we're going to select everything again, move it down here so we can see more of what we're doing. And we're going to take this group and we're going to name this one left handle. And we are going to press Shift D to duplicate it. Set it here. Make sure that you set this as a different node group, because if you don't press that too, these are both going to have the exact same thing. Like if you change one, it'll change the other, and that's not what we're trying to do. So we'll name this one right handle, and I'll just use Node Wrangler here to turn these into little points just so it's a bit easier and neater. And we're going to hook the instance up to the instance, and we're going to hook the points up to the points. Plop that back into the geometry, and you'll see nothing's happened. That's because we haven't changed this. So we're going to set the start size to 0, the end size to 1, and then switch the curve handle position to right. And what that does is that it just puts it on the other end, and it copies the math from that one. So before we get to that, I forgot we need to very quickly add a realize instances node and connect one to each of these. And what this does is it just makes it so that these instances are basically real tangible mesh that we can tamper with. And so we're going to add a merge by distance, and what this does is it takes all the nearby vertices that have the same value and it just snaps them together. And then we're going to add a set shade smooth modifier. And just for fun, we're going to add a set material, connect it directly to the end, and let's just make a simple black color by setting the base color to nothing, specular down, roughness up. Alright, and then set that to black. Go into shading view. Looks perfect. Now if you want to go another step with this, what you can do is you can press N to open up this menu on the right side while mousing over the geometry node section. And with the group input selected, press add twice and switch both of these to integers. And we're going to name this first one resolution, and we're going to name the second one rings. Oops, ridgings. And what these let us do is they let us change the values directly from the modifiers tab. So we're going to set the resolution to 32 and the rings to set the rings to 12, and we can just hook these up directly into the segments and the resolution of the curved circle and hook the rings up to here, to the UV sphere. And let me go back to here to show you what that does. Basically, we can set this to whatever resolution we want. If you want something lower poly, you can go set that to 8. You see it's an octagon. You can set the rings to 6. I recommend keeping the resolution at multiples of 8 and the rings at multiples of 6, because if you go to like 5, it doesn't connect properly. Same with the rings. If I set it to something like 4, oh no, that actually worked. If I set it to something like 5, then you can see that it doesn't fully connect properly just because of how it is with odd numbers. Set it to 2 if you want it to be super pointy. But usually I like keeping it at 12. Maybe if it's a super up close or it's super big, set it to 24. Keep this at 32. And yeah, there you go. Rounded ends for curves.